So here's Gilgamesh's time, right? They're writing all the tablets, they're writing about the floods and all these different events.
So that's 3,500 to 4,000
Exactly.
years ago.
Now, if you were a civilization writing about a previous event, it would make sense that the people that had the event occur to them would not be the ones writing about it, right? Because they'd be gone.
Yeah, of course.
So it would be like stories and things that would be woven down, and then you would write their stories, right?
How old is tier 3?
Well, this is what's wild. After they hit strata 3, because archaeology isn't supposed to exist before that, 80% of the entire team left. They all left.
What?
They're like, you guys are wasting your time. Basically, I'm paraphrasing. And you can go on, and this is a big part of the new book I'm writing. The new book is going to be called The Missing Key of History. It details all of this. But so if you go on Penn Museum Archive, you just look up the city of Shupac, you can read this whole thing I'm telling you right now. Okay, it's very beautifully laid out, a great document that has all the information and diagrams and stuff, okay? So in that, they hit this strata 2 civilization, which is when the known Akkadians and Assyrians and all these guys are supposed to live, and they start digging down further and they find no more human remains, no human activity at all for 3 feet, 4 feet, which is a long way to go. And everyone's like, you know what, this is a waste of time, and like not 70% of them or so, something like, all leave. Except some of the archaeologists and some of the better workmen stayed. They're like, why do you think they stayed? They're like, we haven't found Shupac yet. Okay? We haven't found Shupac yet. So they continue digging, and they find this layer underneath strata 2, as I said, that is 3 to 4 feet thick. Okay? Like, pretty sizable layer. No signs of human activity, no fragments of any kind other than just alluvial material. Alluvial means river, or flood deposited, right? Just like the stories of the Great Flood, okay? Like Atrahasis and the stories of Shupac being wiped out by a great flood and being buried and sealed, okay? Well, they stick around. It's the British and the Germans digging, okay? And they dig further and further because they just had a hunch, and at 16 feet down, 16 feet from the top, now 2 civilizations above them, they all of a sudden hit something. They hit areas of scattered tablets and scattered fragments of stuff, and they find tablets right above it and below that show, because they actually found a tablet above in strata 2 that said Shupac was here, but they didn't find Shupac, so they're like, it's got to be down there somewhere. So they end up finding this base layer, and it's total anarchy from what they can see. Most of the belongings have been removed, have been taken. It looked like the people had left, is what they came to the conclusion of. And they find some beautiful, beautiful pottery. They actually found this really weird diorite hand. Diorite's one of the hardest stones on earth that has 6 fingers. And there's an image of that I'm going to include in the book, and it's on the Penn excavation report. So weird. It's a hand, but with 6 fingers. Very bizarre, whatever that means. But anyway, diorite's an extremely hard stone, so no primitive civilization can carve things like that. Very well carved diorite hand, and they find all this beautiful, beautiful pottery, and they find these tablets and different things, and they're like, oh my god, we found Shupac. Okay? 16 feet to 22 feet down. Massive amount of area, and they have, of course, right on top of it is this 4-foot alluvial flood layer sitting on top of it. Now, in that article, I highly recommend people read it, there's this whole conclusions part at the bottom, where they end up discussing how there are very, very interesting similarities from the ancient Untapishtim Zayasudra story that match what they found. Wow. However, at the very end, they say, I'm paraphrasing, this is simply a play off of thoughts and off of words. We don't really think that this could actually have existed like they said, but it is interesting nonetheless.
They do any sort of dating?
Well, the dating is it's very difficult to date things like that.
Okay, but you have this flood layer above tier 3.
So they see the similarities, and this is where I get on board.
Uh-huh.
I find that article, studied the hell out of it, realized, okay, this might be real evidence to prove that these things really happened, and that this is actual archaeologists saying and pointing towards something mysterious. And that's where it led to all of this, okay? Because now I'm like, okay, so Shupac was real, Eridu was real, Ziusudra was real. Oh my God, did they really land in the Ararat Mountains? Okay?
Right.
So it all starts to unfold. So I start studying that region. It's Eastern Turkey. Today it's Eastern Turkey. It used to be Armenia. So I'm looking around, and I stumble across...
Why do those civilizations... So Shurupak's real, Eridu's real, all of that stuff's in Iraq, in the Fertile Crescent. What does that have to do with, anything?
Because the stories state that they landed in the Ararat Mountains.
So you're saying, let's try to figure out whether that's true, too.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Now, I initially wasn't necessarily being like, okay, I'm going to find evidence of that. In fact, it sort of fell in my lap. I was just looking around that area, and I stumbled across these very mysterious sites that were brand new. The world has really never even heard of. Some of these sites are found in 2017, 2001. We're talking about, we think Göbekli Tepe is new. That was found in the 1800s and then fully excavated in the 1940s. We're talking about something way newer than that stuff.
And when we're saying, so Gilgamesh is the king of Eridu, when we say...
Oh, Uruk. In Uruk.
Oh,
So Eridu is related to a previous king, not related to Gilgamesh. It's a totally different time.
Uruk. Yeah. Okay. So Gilgamesh is the king of Uruk, and the Epic of Gilgamesh says that he is landing in modern-day Turkey?
No,
or who
he seeks out the flood hero to learn about the secrets of immortality from that figure.
Yes.
From the ancient Sumerian figure of Ziusudra Untapishtim, who became the Noah figure in Christianity.
But then what's the connection then between that and Turkey, and modern-day Turkey?
Because in the stories that Ziusudra and his family, they land in the Ararat Mountains.
Okay.
After the flood.
After the flood, they land there.
Yes.
Got it.
And I believe that flood was not Younger Dryas, but actually a completely different event way before it. Because we had this whole time period of an emergence of something that happened. Now, early Christianity and Hebrew traditions already state this. It already state that the sons of Noah repopulated and traveled around the world. That's Japheth, Shem, and Ham. They already state that. There's biblical, all kinds of ancient knowledge around this, except they don't believe that it was before 6,000 years ago.
What's your best guess as to the date?
Could be up to 40,000 years ago. Whoa. Based on looking at ice core sampling and previous climatic events of when floods could have occurred in these things on the Earth. Again, studying Greenland and Antarctic ice cores, and then studying alignments with Greenland when North was in that position and different things like that.
Wow. So would the implication then be that Shupac is
would be
old?
the oldest cities on Earth.
Wow.
And it was sealed and buried and concealed by the flood. And then other civilizations ended up building right on top of it. But there was so much flood debris and material that they never even reached it. It was sealed off. We've
got to get these dating techniques better. It's so frustrating when you find all this stuff, and then it is above a flood. It's below a flood layer. So that should be some decent evidence that this stuff is older than. Well,
archaeologists say that it was a local river event of flooding because the Euphrates is prone to some flooding events. However, in pictures of Eridu, I was able to identify ocean shells that are still on the Ziggurat summit that would have been more inclined to have a Persian Gulf flood from the ocean and maybe even the Black Sea that engulfed that entire region.
That's wild. Well, yeah. I mean...
They're not river shells, they're ocean shells.
And what's that's
well, there's freshwater snails, there's freshwater things like that, but these are ocean shells that are sticking out of the ground. That would be some evidence to potentially prove that, or at least suggest or point towards that this was a flood that was related to the Persian Gulf and not just the Euphrates River flooding during seasonal rises.
But do you really believe that at that time technology could have even possibly existed to get into a boat and then land, pretty far away?
Well, it's described that very, very extensively that the details of how to build it and how to survive were told. So that humanity could survive. It's again, if you want to read the tablets, you read the Epic of Humanity, they're all in there, and it's very detailed with the amount of bitumen and the type of wood, because cedar is the toughest wood on Earth. It's a very specific type of wood, and how to build it and how to seal it off, and that they did survive this event, and that they landed up there, and that's why there's so many ancient traditions that say that happened. Now, this leads to everything else that is right at the core of all this that you have in front of you and that we were talking about before. When I was studying these brand new sites around Lake Vaughan. Now, Lake Vaughan is not that far from the Ararat Mountains. It's relatively in the same area, except that the reason I think they picked Lake Vaughan is that it is, for instance, by the way, it's the 4th deepest lake on Earth. It's 1,500 feet deep, and it has volcanoes all around it. When you have that, you create a very, very fertile soil for growing and creating agriculture, the perfect place to create a new civilization. And that is what I believe potentially happened in that region, was that that group, who are very, very wise sages who were literally being helped by the gods, as they describe it, created something there that potentially has traveled and became maritime, and maybe the answer to Peru and Bolivia and even like Egypt, and basically this lost key to the lost civilizations of Earth. And I can go all into the details of why I would make that very, very bold statement.
Okay, go for it.
So when I was studying these sites, again, very new, like Ionis and Kefkalesi and Shavus Tepe and Korzu and Asverna Tepe, all these different sites, you find all these similarities between them. The first thing that's very strange is they have extremely sophisticated stonework. Megaliths, multi-ton blocks that are carved out of very, very hard stone, and they only used 3 types of stone. They never used anything even local. For instance, a lot of that region is actually limestone that has volcanics around it, but the areas they built these temples on was usually limestone. But they didn't use the limestone blocks at all. In fact, some of the basalt that they used in this construction is considered to possibly come from 350 miles away. Because of the quality of it, there's nothing in the region that has quarries that supports that. And some of it even came from volcanoes like Mount Sufan, like at Kef. But again, we're talking about a civilization that mimics like what we're seeing in Egypt, with this idea of a lost civilization before the dynastic Egyptians that had gone to great lengths to create massive things with stones that they didn't care where they came from, but there was energetic reasons that they were very important to them, where they would go and obtain them to build these things, and then they seemingly were wiped out, and then another culture came later. Now that dynastic equivalent of Egyptians would be what I believe are called the Urartians. The Urartians in this region, 2800 BC, right? About 3,000 years ago. They share a lot of similarities with the Assyrian civilization of the north. Remember I said there was a re-emergence of civilization in Mesopotamia during the time of Gilgamesh, right? You had the Akkadians and Assyrians that re-emerged out of the ashes of the Sumerians. They then know about the stories and things, but they're like a kind of a warlike culture a bit. Ashurbanipal is collecting all these tablets and creating these libraries. But what you have is, I believe, a branch of the Assyrians that moved into what I'm calling this old Holy Land, right? That went up in that region and created a completely separate civilization, right? Hundreds of years go by, they build this civilization, and then the Assyrians and the Babylonians invade and destroy them and wipe them out, right? Poof, they disappear from history. But they leave behind all of these mud brick castles and all of these crude stones and all of this stuff that's built almost entirely on, or in many cases, on these older foundations, just like in Egypt. Make sense? Mm-hmm. So when I stumble across this and I see sites like Ionis and Kefkalesi with these machine-like cut stones, but not just the precision of their work, the fact that they were sun temples aligning to the either the rising or the setting sun, but also having motifs and specific symbols that then we find all around the world. And what those motifs represent and those symbols, I believe, became the core of ancient secret societies in things like the Knights Templar and things like the triptych doorway knowledge we see all around the world. This idea that they're like the Trinity, right? The Holy Trinity in Christianity, the Father, Son, the Holy Ghost. But what does it really mean? I think it represents the three sides of us, right? We have the mind, the body, and then the spirit. And if those three things are balanced, we essentially ascend into this higher form, right? I think Jesus and Buddha and all these individuals in history have just basically been sages trying to teach us that very same thing. And where did that knowledge come from? I believe it was lowered at these sites because all of the symbols all come back to here. All the building styles seem to be traced back to here. All of the ancient traditions say that these three sons traveled around the world and then provided the knowledge. It all seems to come back to one place. And what you have in front of you is a giant basalt, what's called a bas-relief. And it is this massive 3 foot by 3 foot by 4 foot stone column block that has all these sacred teachings that literally became what I think is the basis of Hermeticism itself. You have the concepts of the law of correspondence. You have the concepts of feminine and masculine. You have the tree of life that we find throughout Assyrian civilizations and others. You have even the passing of the pine cone, which we see all around the world in civilizations. And remember with the handbag and the pine cone?
Yeah, it's everything.
You see the first, what I believe is the first iteration on that anywhere in the world.
Wow.
And not only that, but the original sun cross that became the Knights Templar cross. All from the same locations in this part of Turkey that just happened to correspond to where these divine sages were supposed to have landed.
So you think they had sort of ancient Hermetic wisdom that then has only been conserved via secret societies since?
Yeah.
And so what do you think these symbols mean? So like, we talked about the Trinity. What about the cross?
Well, the sun cross represents what I believe is this balance of all harmonic things, everything. And I think it goes back to this idea of source or God, the balance of all things, right? And that's why the cross became such an integral part of Christianity, but not that cross. What's interesting is that Christianity's cross is not shared by that cross except for the Vatican like the Pope and the Vatican have that very same cross. Not only that, the Pope has it on on its cloak, and in front of the Vatican is a giant pine cone.
Yeah, I've seen it.
Okay?
It's amazing.
Very same symbols that come from this region.
Yeah.
And that's why I believe, for instance, these sites were visited by Xerxes, Alexander the Great, and many, many other great people throughout history.
So Xerxes is Persian, Alexander the Great's Roman.
It's like they're all going back to somewhere.
You think they're trying to find something special at this site?
Exactly.
What do you think they're looking for?
I think they're looking for the holy knowledge of, you ready for this? Take that other one out, the big one underneath there.
Yeah.
Look at what he's holding in his hand.
Looks like maybe an acacia leaf? Or...
No, not that, the other thing.
Oh. Like a little...
Like a cup or a chalice.
Cup. Yeah, like maybe a Holy Grail or something.
Exactly.
Really?
Exactly.
Interesting.
And if you look up what that means, it means, we know what some of these things mean, right? If you look up what a cup means in religion, it means the passing of a spiritual or religious doctrine, okay? He's now holding a pine cone for knowledge that is coming off of the central tree of life in the center that has 3 different ones with balancing of the center. Now, if you look at the top, do you see the 3 step pyramids with the 2 eagles on either end?
Yes.
Now look at what the flowering of the center that comes right off of where he's basically his head is pointing towards. You see that? Now that consists of 7 rays, which I believe correspond to the 7 colors of the visible light spectrum.
Interesting.
And we also have 7 chakras inside us that is talked about during Kundalini and ancient.
Well, 7 comes up a lot. You have the 7 Hecalotes.
7 sages.
7 Arit in the Egyptian. These are palaces that you go through, sort of Kabbalistic protocols where, okay.
So I think what we're talking about right now are literally some of the most holy sites on earth. with knowledge that's then passed around the world. And archaeologists have severely gotten this wrong.
It's fascinating. I mean, when you talk to like Brian Murarescu, who wrote, The Immortality Key, he talks about the Eleusinian mystery rituals much later, obviously, in Greece. But when you go deeper with him, he'll say, no, this stuff has actually been going on well before the Eleusinian mystery rituals. You had Minoan and Mycenaean proto-examples of these sort of mystery rituals. And so conserved knowledge via, specific rituals and symbology, kind of makes sense that it would go back, well before. And maybe these things are that, can't be taught via transferring of documents and, just, pure, just teaching semantic knowledge. Maybe it's something that needs to be activated within a given individual.
Right. And now, if you look at the other image to your right there, you can see the griffin that became one of the core symbols of Greece, of ancient Greece. And I believe based on the trajectory of where these different groups went that were part of the same area, the suns, is that even ancient Greece, just like Plato and Plutarch discuss, has an earlier history than just they're called the ancient Athenians or proto-Athenians.
Yep.
In those, they describes it actually fighting against Atlantis. And so what we could be looking at is the implications of the emergence of a global golden age that may even connect to the ancient Athenians in Atlantis.
It's fascinating. So why would the griffin point
It's a guardian. It's an ancient guardian in Greece, and it is guarding what I believe is the symbol of time.
Oh yeah, the hourglass, yeah.
And I believe that they're talking about guarding time for eternity. Basically, what they're guarding is, I believe, is this concept of balance and harmony in all things.
That's so interesting. Well, the Templars supposedly had the secrets of time travel. If you read the Umberto Eco, Foucault's Pendulum, there's a part where they had these sort of rituals that they would do, and it's sort of related to Kundalini. And then, at the very end of this crazy long description of the history of the Templars, Umberto Eco says, maybe they even had the secrets of time travel.
Well, it's mind-boggling to consider like the connections, because let me give you an example.
Yeah.
In South America, in Bolivia, we have Viracocha holding the two condors on either side, which I think is the same concept you see in front of you of the pillars of holding balance. And that god Haldi you see in front of you is the same thing as Viracocha, and that what we're seeing around Lake Titicaca with the emergence of the pre-Tiwanaku civilizations in Pumapunku and around Peru is like a mirror civilization that was created. It was very much the same. Lake Titicaca is one of the deepest lakes, just like Lake Vaughan, surrounded by volcanoes.
Yeah.
And they both built out of the same andesite basalt work that we see mimicking each other, the same symbols.
So you have the same materials.
Same symbols, the Chicana symbol, the cross.
Yeah.
The Viracocha, we see the same type of building style. I show pictures from Kef
Where is
Kalesi.
that? That's in Peru?
Yeah.
How many sites do we have like this that we can correspond as far as symbology, materials, structures?
I'm tracing them all around the world, potentially even to Egypt.
How many?
At least half a dozen. For instance, that step pyramid design, I've also seen it in Angkor Thom in Cambodia. And in other places.
Do we have any sense of how old Angkor Thom is? That's another thing.
It's another mysterious site where we had
from
other cultures that adopted it later on, and then it kind of just disappeared into history. But the point is that we may be looking...
Is that older than Angkor Wat, though?
Well, they're part of the same complex.
Angkor Wat, I was just looking it up, and it was like past 1000 AD, and I was like, that doesn't make sense to me. It's got to be older.
They have no way to date things like that.
Right,
just because someone comes along and writes something into something else, it doesn't date it. Now, I'll give you an example. Now, archaeologists believe that that all of these ruins, all of these artifacts, all these symbols came from the Urartians. Because the Urartians wrote cuneiform into some of the temples. Just little spots here and there, like King Manoah or Kirusa II built this, and that's what their basis for it being the Urartians, except the Urartians had none of the same incorporation of these motifs into their artwork. Was quite primitive. They built on top of all the base stonework with mud brick.